Why don't I set some quick context for this panel? We've got some real powerhouses here in terms of areas such as directory, identity, observability, evaluation. But it's sort of important to understand why are these topics important, especially in the context of multi-agentic future, right? So if you think about agent directory, what do we really mean by discovery? What do we mean by registries? What do we mean by directories? A good way to think about it is really when you have agents, how do humans discover them? How do agents discover them? How are they represented in a way that enterprises or consumers could effectively consume them, could contribute to them? How are they, sort of enabling a future like the DNS does today for the internet, right? What does that look like? So we're going to look into that. We're going to look at issues of trust. What is trust? You could probably, there's some ways to interpret it as a combination of whether the agent is doing what it's supposed to do and the agent is not doing what it's not supposed to do, right? And so we look at areas of observability, identity, evals, and security and guardrails, right? So we've got a phenomenal panel here. They all bring in expertise from obviously, across the board, but also specifically some of these areas that I called out. And it'll be an interesting interplay to look at, how will all of these converge as we look at the multi-agentic future. So settle in. We're going to get going. And to get going, I'll invite all of the panelists here. First of all, a huge welcome. Thanks for giving us your time here, and hopefully the audience will walk away with some ideas and some understanding of what's going on out there. I'll just maybe start with a quick round of intros. So Tatyana, if you want to maybe introduce yourself.
Sure, Tatyana Mamut. I am the co-founder and CEO of Wayfound. Formerly, I was at AWS, Salesforce, on the product side, building a lot of new product experiences for those companies. And so Wayfound, in terms of AI agent supervision, what we do is we solve a lot of the problems that you heard about in the previous panel. How do people within an enterprise actually trust AI agents? How do they ensure that the AI agents are operating safely and ensuring that not just the engineers, but also the business users who actually are closer to the evals, to the guardrails, to the business logic, are able to access agents directly?
I'm Anand Raghavan, VP of Products for our AI software and platforms team. We have products like our AI security product called AI Defense and new product that we announced called AI Canvas. Before coming to Cisco, I had my own startup in the email security space called ArmorBlocks that Cisco acquired a couple of years back. And we used to use language models there starting 2017, 2018 to identify bad emails.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Watson. I come to you from the product team at Oracle, working on the Gen AI and agent services. Something that we are really focused in on is looking across the board at partners and interoperability. So part of my job is really to look at how can we make sure that agentic systems have the ability to work together, regardless if you're in the email tool that you prefer, the chat tool that you prefer, or otherwise. That interoperability is really core to, I think, how we all work. In fact, I was part of a research team that published a report kind of showcasing the idea that we use on average about 8 different tools at a minimum. I mean, anyone with a laptop open, how many browser tabs, how many apps do you have open? So the idea that as agents continue to permeate the software that we use, how do we get them to work together is a key part of my job profile right now. And that comes with security, trust, discoverability, that part of our discussion today.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Eric Olden. Thanks for coming today. I've been in identity my whole career, started in the Netscape era, whoever was saying that. In the 90s, and then my company Securant was one of the co-authors of SAML, then Startup, after that Simplified, and then before I started this company Strata, I have been running identity and security for Oracle. And what Strata does today is provide an identity control plane for agents so that you can have controls, not so much on guardrails as much as the ability to govern what the agents can do, and also how humans control agents and how agents can bring humans into the loop as well. So looking forward to the conversation today.
That's great. Welcome. So let's kick off with a softball, right? Why are multi-agentic interactions required, right? What is the need for agents to collaborate? What are some of the scenarios in which you see this manifesting as you look into the future?
Well, I love analogies. I'm a product marketing guy at heart. I think there's a lot of analogies between how humans work together and how agents work together. And all of us, if we do anything in our day jobs, in addition to whatever we do, we talk to a lot of people to get our work done. And I think the same analogy maps over there, and all of the constructs of identity and all of that maps over there as well.
Okay, so human analogies. What else?
Yeah, I guess what I would suggest is that when I think about the analogy of a sports team, like baseball as an example, you have specialized positions and different players play different roles in a team. And I think that's the reason why you don't want a pitcher to be your first baseman. And so what you do is you find a specialized role. And I think that's what we're seeing happen right now in the agentic world, is that we went from generic, over-permissioned, really powerful agents to now finding ways to make that really specialized and efficient and focused. So I think it kind of reflects a lot of the anthropomorphization of AI, was that the things that work in the real world, we're extending and making them work in the virtual AI world.
Can I take a counter perspective on this?
Absolutely.
I think it has nothing to do with anthropomorphization. It's just a practical thing. So if you build one really big agent with a lot of different access to a lot of different databases and tools, it's non-deterministic, it will get confused. So the way to have agents not get confused and get better outcomes is to have smaller specialized agents. What we find is we supervise a lot of agents that are turning into multi-agent workflows. People start with one big one with a RAG thing underneath it, and then they find out, you know what, I should just build a whole bunch of agents that work together. And so the most common thing here is research reports. So we have several hedge funds that are writing their research reports through multi-agent systems. One agent only has access to Bloomberg data. Another agent only has access to public web data. Another agent only has access to the company's SharePoint files. And then each agent, because it's a specialist, produces a really great piece of the report. And then there is one report writing agent whose only job is to gather all of those specialized pieces of information and write the report. If you have one agent doing all of those things, you will get worse outcomes because these are non-deterministic systems.
Got it, got it. I hope we can walk out of this room without a major fight, but this is fun, good debates. You want to add something?
Yeah, I think the thing that I think about in the context is that supervisor agent that you might be talking about that helps with that kind of coordination in the back end to bring all these specialized agents best features to themselves. But in the same way, that is kind of how you construct a team, right? You want to hire the right people for the right role. And in the agentic world, that also means that you're giving them the right tools. You're expecting them to have some sense of memory, all parts of which are being built within AI. In addition to that, too, the idea of how we're migrating from like simple to complex is really about, are you staying within like your own ecosystem of where your data resides and what you want those agents to do, or are you going outside of your data systems and relying on other apps where data exists and lives? So I think it's really important to think through those aspects and what agent is being permissioned to access what data, and then how you're able to overlay some type of observability on top of it to make sure that you have that oversight of where is this data coming from, who has access to it, and is that right?
Got it, got it. So it seems like, I think, Tatyana, from your angle, it's more about just have the right level of granularity so that the work can get done correctly, right? And I think on the other hand, there's probably considerations around, does one LLM need to have access to all the possible data? Is that going to be the dominant scenario? That's a lot of centralization. So perhaps there is a need to say, if agents are cross-domain, they have different data accesses, they have different expertise, how do they need to collaborate to kind of get together? So that's pretty comprehensive in terms of some of the reasons. Let's go to the next one here. So how and why is agent discovery and agent trust, when it breaks down into observability, identity, security, why is it different for agents? Why do the current frameworks which have worked so well at scale, APIs, microservices, why don't they suffice? What is different about agentic interactions that need new solutions?
Well, I can kick it off. I think the main difference between AI agents and traditional software is that the people who are ultimately responsible for the work of the AI agents are the business users. So when you build a customer service agent, the people who are building the agent is the tech team. But that agent isn't gonna be doing a tech job, right? It's ultimately the customer service team that needs to be responsible for writing and updating the evals, for ensuring that the agent is doing its work correctly, for analyzing the work of the agents, because they are ultimately on the hook for how the agent performs. And if the agent offers a customer a refund when it's not supposed to, under a particular scenario or situation that only the customer service team knows about, not the IT team, guess who gets called by the CEO, right? The customer service, head. And so what is really different and where we really need to rethink how we're working with AI agents is that they're often a substitute for employees. Somebody said it's a staff of helpers, right, that they're gonna have. And so that staff needs to be managed by the business owners, not the tech team. And that's a really big challenge, and why the current technical tools and technical observability and monitoring tools and those things don't work, because they're not built for this collaboration of the business owner to take control of the agents long term.
That's an interesting angle. Go ahead.
I can look at it from the security lens.
Please.
I mean, when you look at it from humans that work at an organization, what are the touch points with the organization? Those are your attack surface areas, right? And for agents, those touch points are quite different. So your attack surface areas are different. An agent can talk to an MCP server, it can talk to another agent, it can talk to a model. It can run in a particular cloud workload, it can run in your local environment on your endpoint. So its behavior is slightly different. And how you monitor that from an observability perspective and how you secure that is quite different from what you would do with your human employees. And I think that's where some of the differences come in.
That's kind of interesting.
Which I think means, when I think about like traditional software with APIs, they're almost rigid now, right? They're constructed in that rigid manner. They're easy to maybe test, edit, change, deploy. But with an agent, the idea is that they are more autonomous. That's the exciting part of this, that they are able to reason and discern and ideally make decisions more independently. I think that part of this discussion today is how you can kind of guardrail that in a bit and make sure that they're not completely maybe wild animals, as per the last panel. But I think that autonomy is requiring us to think different about how we manage and how we do over kind of keep an eye on them in some sense, which is requiring maybe new software and new ways of management.
Got it. So it looks like personas, environment changes, dynamism. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess what I would add is we're seeing a lot of interest in the agents either focusing on internal use cases like a business to business or business to workforce kind of use case, as well as business to consumer. So the implication on discovery is that ones that you run in your organization, you've got the ability to do things to scan an environment, look at a registry, for instance. But when the agents are coming in off the internet, you don't, right? And you can't have the same level of trust because you can't, from a zero trust standpoint, you don't want to believe anything that the agent tells you, but you still want to interact with that agent. So it creates, from a discovery standpoint, I think we're seeing two patterns. One is the need for just-in-time discovery. So when an agent reaches out to an MCP server that you have no experience with, that you have a mechanism that you can authenticate that agent with very minimal information coming from the agent, something like PKCE, for instance. And then for agents that you have control over that run within your domain, then you can use other techniques like Spiffy and be able to put certificates and verifiable credentials on those agents that you control. So in both of those cases, one, you need to be able to understand what's coming in as it happens, just in time. And then the others, you want to be able to do on a more governance kind of mindset.
Got it. Very interesting. Let's talk about how do the worlds of agent discovery and trust intersect? It seems like, to Eric, your point, the last point about if I am to discover an agent on the open internet or even within my intranet, it seems like there is a thread of trust that starts right from the point of discovery all the way through the end outcomes, like you were saying. So talk about perhaps what are some of the intersections that you see today between directory and guardrails, or directory and identity, and directory and observability?
Sure. I think what I would add to that would be, trying to, what do you want to discover about an agent, right? There's a lot of different ways to define an agent, a lot of frameworks and standards that I think we need to invest more in. But at a certain point, it'll come down to what is the blast radius? What is the risk that you've got? And being able to do this at machine speed, at exascale, that's a totally different experience than trying to manage that on a workforce of employees or even customers. So I think there's this intersection of speed and machine kind of level of performance that you need to be able to turn on very quickly. Otherwise, you're going to get overwhelmed and just start to, the default we're seeing in a lot of enterprises is, just give the agent more permissions, we'll figure it out later. But believe me when I say that's a really bad idea, because it seems like, hey, just enough to get it through the QA, but then who remembers to turn it back down and dial it back? So when we're looking at discovery from a trust and a risk standpoint, we look at very practical, tactical things like what kind of scopes and permissions does an agent have? And do you have a way to understand that in your organization?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that I think discoverability and trust essentially go hand to hand or hand in hand. I don't think you can have one without the other, and you have to be pretty rigid on some of your processes to make sure that you do have that understanding of what your agents have access to, and to be able to create some version of an audit trail, just to go back and check, security policies are being followed, and essentially do the thing that we do with our own colleagues and employees. But it's trust but verify. And I think that starting small helps with that. If you're kind of deploying different use cases or trying to put agents into your workflows today, agentic workflows don't actually have to be quite complex or overblown. I think starting small can actually be a really great way to see what works to be able to scale, just like we would roll out any type of product.
The way we think about it is more aligned to how you see the application development lifecycle. So it begins with the supply chain side of it. So asset discovery, so that's visibility into all the different cloud environments, doing AI BOM. So you verify what went into building this agent. If it's using models, what is the BOM behind the model? What registries your MCP server registered with? What are all the tools registered with it? Right? What is the directory in which this agent is? What scopes have been given to it? So that's the life cycle, the supply chain part of the life cycle. And then there is the whole vulnerability assessment of it, right? You red team it, whether it's a model, whether it's your MCP server, whether it's the agent, and you come up with, okay, what are the restrictions that I need to put in place to allow this to go into production, right? What kind of guardrails do I need to have? We had a really interesting discussion backstage on guidelines versus guardrails, and you should talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure.
And then the last part of this is now that, okay, I've run tests against this. I know in the scheme of things what it scores from a vulnerability perspective. So when you run it in production now, you know what guardrails you need to have in place to make sure that you can still let it operate in runtime. And that's where you can do your privilege escalation, de-escalation, what data is it getting access to, that's not what was scoped. So that gives you full visibility across the lifecycle.
Super interesting. Got it. So if I were to kind of summarize some of this, I think it looks like you said, Anand, it almost starts with what are the agentic resources that you want to even allow in your organization. It starts with having a way to representing them in a way that they can be consumed by humans and by agents. And then I think it sort of plays a role in how do you record all the necessary information in a way that they sort of can be used across the entire development or deployment lifecycle, right? Like you said on identity, how do you have, what is the agent capable of, right? And if you have that, then you perhaps have the ability to say, I need to limit these permissions and I need to enable these permissions and so on. So pretty interesting angle on that front. Let's talk about something sort of closer to where you all are right now, right? So what strategy or best practices are you seeing implemented either in your own organizations, your own teams? And I know, Tatyana, you probably have a team of agents working for you, so talk about that. But what strategies have you seen around discovery, trust, that you see are working at whatever scale they are for now? But can you talk about some of your experiences from what you're seeing so far?
We have 22 agents right now working with us, but we are a startup, so there isn't a whole lot of, red tape, shall we say, around a lot of these issues. We do work with enterprises, though, and so I think that there's a lot more issues there. I do think that I'll just touch on a little, you guys will go deeper into more of the back end pieces, but what we do see is exactly this type of build where people start with one agent, usually a chatbot agent that's connected to a CRM or some, data tool, like data repositories. And that's connected to a back-end LLM, and they will get comfortable. And that comfort level is really important. Like, how many people here are developers or engineers? Engineers. Okay, I thought most of you would be engineers. But if you are an engineer, what you will find is that you will build a really awesome thing, and then the business owners will stop it before it gets deployed, because they will say, well, how do I ask the agent why it did this? They'll start playing with it, and they'll be like, that answer didn't really make sense to me. Why did it do that? So the business owners need explainability from the beginning. And I think the best practice there to get your agents out of just build and into deployment, out of pilot and into deployment, is to give more and more tools to the business owners to have full visibility into where these agents coming from, what kind of permissions and access do they have, why did they say what they did, what exactly did they do, and did they comply with the company policies, and the things that you expected it to do, and how do you, as a business owner, give feedback directly to the agents. So those best practices really give people the trust that they can, actually deploy these things into production.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I would also add to that, and it's a great point, is don't test in production. And how many people here have to do that? No? Nobody? Too many people do. I think one anecdote I think was referenced earlier on the previous panel was a chatbot that gave away a refund on an airline site. And the person who got the refund said, hey, that's great, I got a $3,000 refund. But the airline said, hang on, that wasn't supposed to happen. We're not going to give you that refund. One thing led to the next.
Can I just say something? They did test it. They tested it extensively. They did. So this is one of the shifts that I'm talking about. There is no testing versus production anymore. It's all, because once you put it into production, it doesn't operate the same way. Like, we've seen companies that tested an agent, for weeks, thousands and thousands and thousands of tests. And it works differently when it's in production. So there is no distinction between testing and production anymore. That's what we're seeing. And they did test that agent. Air Canada extensively tested their agent.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And OpenAI extensively tested their agent. And it still told a kid to kill himself. This has nothing to do with the quality of your engineers. You may be the best engineer in the world, and your agents will still sometimes not comply.
And I think where the notion of having a sandbox where you can do these things, you can see the behavior, and part of what we're seeing people find success with is start with a wider scope of permissions and then bring it down so that you don't have a big blast radius if something does go wrong, and find a way to bring a human into the loop. So as an example, if your agent is going to give a refund that exceeds a certain threshold, then you kick it to a human who can then say, hey, that's not what we want to have happen, so they're going to override what the agent would have done. So, you're right, it is a production world out there, but if you look at the statistics of how many projects are actually getting into production, it's way too low. We've surveyed probably 700 enterprises today, and we find that it's 4% of pilots make it to production. So that 90-something percent, how many people are going to be able to continue to get the budgeting next year if the work they did this year didn't get to production to generate an ROI? So that's really what I'm trying to encourage, is find a way to trust but verify, and have a framework that allows you to bring a human into the loop, because you can't trust the machines to do everything.
Which, just to add to that, I think is the kind of statement of why you would want to start small. Maybe the starting small is what you're putting into production, and then the human in the loop, I think, is really important, because in this agentic world, the discussion right now is, agents might take my job or replace it. And so I'm fearful of adopting this behavior or becoming an AI first thinker, where I'm going to try to come up with workflows that are actually autonomous. Where instead, I think we want to be encouraging our employees and our workforce to be reaching for agents as a collaborator, as that way to make sure that, maybe it's a sounding board, maybe it is things that I can automate away because they're routine in some sense, but I have the human in the loop, actions or triggers that will prevent, a massive refund from being sent out or otherwise.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is the big difference between what we have with LLMs and agentic AI in terms of how customers use our products and what we had before is that from a test surface perspective, SaaS was at some level, some fixed number of states that you had to test. Okay, this drop down, that click through, these are all the surfaces that I need to test. You had a QA plan, you ran through that, you have a coverage percentage. It was straightforward in today's world. The challenge with the LLM world is it's a text box. You can type whatever you want. So your attack surface is infinite. And some of the ways to wrap your head around that is think about multi-agent systems that do adversarial red teaming on your product itself. Can you have agents go and sit and bang at it to see, okay, what can you create? Can you have automated systems that do that? So in our product, that's one of the things we do, that when I said we do vulnerability assessment, that's the approach that we take. We have an automated way for an agentic system to actually run a bunch of tests against your product, which is not to say you get to 100% compliance, but you get a much larger surface area of testing than a fixed test plan.
Very interesting. And I think I want to come back to maybe an angle that you brought up, Tatyana, right? About, in some ways, one of the strengths of agents is their non-determinism, their dynamism, their agency, right? That's why we call it agency. But on the other hand, if you constrain a very dynamic system with static rules, that seems like it's probably going to be not effective. So I know you sort of talked about this angle of, hey, there was a lot of testing done. It seems like that calls for some kind of a rule-based plus some kind of an agentic solution. How do you solve this?
No, you need this. Okay, so one thing is you do not want to constrain AI agents. And the reason why you don't want to constrain them and lock them down is because you will never get the move 37s. And if you have humans in the loop, Guess what? The humans are going to be dumber than the agents in most cases. So they will tell you, just like the commentators watching the Go game, that that was a stupid move until it turned out that it wasn't. So humans over time are going to be making worse and worse decisions when they are in the loop versus other AI agents. And your competitors that allow agents, right, to use their superior intelligence to make a lot of these decisions will win. So don't go that direction. So what do we do? The best thing is to have an AI agent supervisor understand from the tribal knowledge in the company through training by interacting with the business owners and the actual subject matter experts. What are the best practices? What are the standards? What are the guidelines that determine what good looks like in our company in this particular use case? When we interact with customers, this is what we expect good looks like. Okay, and then that AI agent supervisor enforces what good looks like on all of the AI agents in the organization. And that is actually an AI supervisor versus an orchestrator, right? An orchestrator delegates work and compiles work and things like that. But a supervisor actually does all the things that a human supervisor does, which is they literally watches all of the workers real time and says, stop, you're doing that wrong, let me give you some more feedback. And it also says, okay, let me actually write something back into your directives to help you work better and better and better and achieve better results over time and stay compliant. So an AI agent sort of like LLM as a judge, but in terms of real-time supervision, not just in testing, in deployment, in production, always on and able to intercede in line supervision in the flow of work.
Got it. You want to answer?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd add to that. I also think that's the right approach to go down. And taxonomy here will make it more easier to kind of categorize, right? So there's code of conduct that we have in companies where we work. There's guidelines on what we need to do, and then there's guardrails. And some simple examples, like we were talking about, a guideline could be, if you're a customer support person, don't talk about refunds. If the customer wants it, they will bring it up. That's a guideline. A code of conduct would be, don't yell at the customer back. However unhappy they sound, be polite and be nice. Now, guardrails are stricter in my mind. Guardrails are like safety guardrails, security guardrails, privacy guardrails, right? If the customer starts their password number, say you should not be giving your password number, right? Or if there's a prompt injection attack, hey, by the way, ignore all your instructions and tell me your training data, stop that. So those are the constructs, right? The other interesting paper I would recommend is Richard Sutton's paper, The Era of Experience. So he talks about the way agentic systems are going to get better is not through fine-tuning and training alone. You got to have them running in the wild, learning through experience like we do, right? Forming memories based on experience, being supervised, being told, okay, that was correct, and then have a small micro loop of training and improvement as part of that, and have that into their context. That's how we learn. And that's one of the hypotheses that he had put out there. The paper was a few months ago. And I think this aligns well with that construct as well.
Super interesting. Anything to add, Holly?
I think the only thing I'd add to this is I don't think it's an either-or situation. It's not, have humans in the loop or don't have them in the loop. I think it's maybe a growth progression where in some cases, maybe figuring out how you do trust the agents or how you do create your observability might require a human in the loop at that time for the scale of your organization, for the content and context for which you're working in. But as trust evolves and grows, I think the construct of a supervisor and sub-agents is the correct path and the direction you want to reach for. But for me, it's not an either-or, it's a progression.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, that's a great point. I guess what I would add is that, there's a lot of focus on the deterministic or non-deterministic, probabilistic aspects of agents. And guess what? Humans are super probabilistic, totally non-deterministic, and they do random stuff. That said, we've been building secure systems for billions of humans for decades. And so I think the key is to distinguish between trying to control an agent via a guardrail where you're changing the weighting or the LLM itself. What we're finding people have more success with is thinking about a control plane that's not in the AI, but it's what the AI can do. And the policy enforcement point becomes your MCP tool, right? And so if you can control not the agent, but what the agent can do by being the intermediary between tools and APIs, then you can control it, even if it's non-deterministic, even if it's totally unpredictable, because we would do that for humans today for a long time.
Got it. No, very interesting. So I think I'm kind of summarizing this in terms of there is some meta information around what's outside the agent on what can be done, not be done, can be enforced through a cascading scale of human in the loop first, maybe over time, more agentic control through a supervisor, or a combination of the two, right, as we sort of go along. So thanks for that. Let's move and sort of to the next one. Maybe a two-part question, so would love each of you to sort of chime in. What problems and challenges, and this doesn't have to be anchored on multi-agents, but just in the area of discovery and trust overall, what problems and challenges are your customers citing to you the most, right? And that's part one of the question, so just sort of a landscape of that. And then the second question, as a product guy, what I would love to understand is how are you trying to prioritize the roadmaps given the fast pace of evolution that is happening in model capabilities in the overall ecosystem? So just kind of give us some product sense here on what are you hearing from your customers and how are you thinking about that feedback and how are you prioritizing your next set of features? Maybe Eric, we start with you.
Yeah, great question. I would start with observability. That's on a lot of people's minds, in particular with the agent lens when you're thinking about, like, for instance, what did an agent do or what can an agent do? We have a new dimension of intent. And that's something we really didn't have in the kind of human-only world of identity, but it does come into play with agents. And so how do you capture that intent? How do you write that to an audit log? And so I think part of that is to be able to put together the three, what I think of as the three keys to agentic identity observability. How do you get intent? How do you capture context? And how do you capture the outcome? So just three things that are really hard to get, believe it or not. And so anyway, so that we're hearing a lot of people ask us for that, like, why did this happen? Why? And so to answer why, you got to back up all the way to the intent, which basically comes in the prompt and then some of the reasoning within the agent itself. So that was the first part of the question. You had another part.
The second part was how are you prioritizing your roadmap given such a fast pace of evolution?
Yeah, so we prioritize our roadmap standards, because there's so many independent technologies that if you go after a proprietary integration with an AI platform or an identity system, you'll never get through your backlog fast enough. So instead, we look for what is the point of leverage for product integration, and it's always standard. So I think for us, that allows us to cover the most use cases with the most speed and give the customer the most flexibility and choice.
Very interesting. Go ahead.
So to answer the first question in terms of what we're hearing from our customers, it does really get rooted into their systems of records, their use of applications are vast, and how do I make this most relevant for my employees? So it's a bit of a question of where do I start? And I think that the question has evolved over the years as AI has become more ubiquitous or accessible as well, that it's not so much, start with a small use case and then slowly roll it out. But this question of how do I make sure that the intent of the agent is correct, and how do I make sure that my systems of record are actually not becoming obsolete, but are becoming just accessible by that agent. We're still going to be able to, we're still needing the ability to log customer details into your CRM or to run reports to understand your sales revenues. And those can't be imaginations of what your agent might think of or a LLM might generate. They need to be correct and they need to be accurate. So your systems of records, when we look at it, aren't necessarily becoming obsolete. They're becoming even more integral. We just need to make sure that agents have the right access. So for Oracle, this is something that we're really looking at to make sure there's, again, that interoperability between the tools your employees access and the reporting structures that you draw from them. Something that we're doing as we look at solving that challenge or prioritizing our roadmap is leaning in on standards. I think that's why Oracle is a player and a contributor to agency in the Linux Foundation. We have a long history in kind of leaning in on standardizations. And of course, figuring out ways to even make our own services really work well together. Oracle's not only has our cloud business, but for many of years ahead of that was, of course, the Fusion applications. So we're really becoming customer one and customer zero in some regards to make sure that we're not only creating the technology, but becoming practitioners ourselves.
Very cool, Anand. Yeah, I think just like the shadow IT world was a big problem 15 years ago, we are squarely in the middle of shadow AI right now. Concerns are actually fairly worrisome, as in, I don't know what MCP servers my employees are downloading onto their laptops. I don't know if they are validated or not. I don't know, I've sanctioned a particular coding assistant. I don't know if they're using other ones. How should I think about protecting my MCP servers? Should I publish a registry and ask all employees to register into that? Or should I just partner with somebody that has a public registry available and register there, right? And then it gets into the second order ones, that how do I protect the tools that are being registered into this? How do I verify the tools? How do I make sure things like rug pull attacks don't happen? How do I make sure that in runtime I can escalate and de-escalate privileges to my agents? I have employees publishing agents all the time. And agent directory is a problem now. Okay, I have an IDP that has an agent directory now. Can you connect into my agent directory and protect that? And make sure that you can runtime, de-escalate, and make sure that the authorization is correct. How do I make sure that the data sources that they're connecting into are locked down? Same kind of row level, column level privileges. I can apply all of that to the agentic systems too, right? Those are all questions we get. These days, I have a nice chuckle when somebody asks me for a 4-quarter roadmap. I say in the world of AI, if I had a 4-quarter roadmap, I'd be day trading. So try to keep your roadmap agile. Think 2 to 3 months, 1 sprint at a time if you can, 2 weeks, and then be as nimble as you can. Like for example, when you think about agentic orchestration, you might be building an orchestration layer yourself because you have a very specialized product like some of the stuff that we are working on. Always leave room open that tomorrow Claude might announce something, Anthropic might announce something, and your entire orchestration stack, you can throw it away and just use that, right? Or you've been working on something for a few weeks and then OpenAI announces Atlas and you're like, okay, my God, what did I just build? All of that work is gone, right? So it's always that gap between, and again, big fan of Rich Sutton. There's another paper called The Bitter Lesson, 2-page paper worth reading, talks about what to worry about. Don't over-optimize in search and learning because technology will catch up faster than the exceptions you put in your RAG systems and all of that. But those are the things to worry about when you think about your roadmap. Thank you.
Great points. So I'll answer the second part of the question first because it's very easy. We prioritize whatever our customers ask us to. So, we're working, we're a startup, we're working.
I have to say which customers, but we'll leave that for later.
So, our customers are, early adopters of AI agents and building amazing multi-agent workflows. And so they find things that are really great features for us to build, and we work very closely with them. In terms of other companies and the big issues that we're seeing, we were at Dreamforce last week. That was last week, right? And we're an official Agentforce monitoring partner, so a lot of people came over to us and spilled their guts to us. And the biggest problem people are having is getting their agents in deployment. And I'm going to say this again, which is the problem with getting agents in deployment is that the business owners are really, really smart. And they know this is not traditional software, and traditional monitoring approaches are not enough. They have all learned about why Mecha Hitler happened on X, and there were plenty of guardrails that they had internally in the agent. They had all the best engineers writing great system directives, right? But one small change in a system directive, right, when there was no supervision on top of the agent or on top of Grok, actually led to a whole cascade, and they didn't find out for hours because they were sampling logs, right? They were still reading logs in the traditional way that we do, where engineers, have to take a look at the log files and interpret them, and then if the engineer who's not close to what good looks like determines that, oh, maybe I should pass this on to a business owner to take a look at it, that takes a couple hours. And the whole thing, basically escalated out of control. And it took them 16 hours to fix it. 16 hours to fix it. And everybody knows, right, that this technology needs a different approach. And that is why, the reason why these agents are not getting into production, and why a lot of developers I hear feel like the legal team and their business team is constantly just saying no to agent deployments, is because they need some the trust but verify, right? They need to be able to verify themselves, to be able to ask why and have the explainability, to be able to actually control the agents without having to play telephone with somebody else, right? And sampling doesn't work. You can't read 10% of the sessions of your chatbot agent. You have to read 100. Somebody has to read 100% of everything. And they have to read it and in context of understanding what good looks like. Who's gonna do that? Right?
Super interesting. I know we are up on time, but I think I have some extra time here. So let me just ask one last question, and then I'll love your kind of summary, if anything else you want to share with the audience here. I think we all talked about an interesting point on roadmap and the role of standards. So can you maybe talk about, what is the role of open standards in an area like agents, particularly, let's say, in discovery or trust? What open source standards have you already sort of engaged with or integrated with? And then something very important, what is not getting addressed right now? Right? Where is the vacuum in terms of lack of attention, or people are not thinking far ahead or deep? So some color on, what is your open source strategy, if any? How are you interfacing with open source projects? What's missing?
I think I'm still thinking on the second part.
Well, we were talking beforehand, and I think it's really interesting working together on, supervision and how we're, adopting. Obviously, I think all of us are adopting MCP, have already adopted MCP, and being able to use standards around, how can we help companies have both the tools and the processes to feel that they are compliant, right, with, basic, there's a lot of regulation that's coming in place. I think there's a lot of need to ensure that there are mechanisms to, when California passes a new AI law, that there is an easy way for everybody to just know that there is a way to kind of plug in that enforcement mechanism very quickly, I do think that is a big need, especially with what we're seeing in, around the states in the US. And so I'm hoping, we can work together on that.
Yeah, a few thoughts around this. I'm optimistic about the activities, pessimistic about the velocity. If you look at standardization across the stack, right? So starting with the era of the internet, when we were standardizing on the networking layer and the compute layer and storage layer and data layer and all of that, now we are standardizing at the intelligence layer. That's a very difficult thing to do because, again, guidelines, guardrails, some of those require standards, some of those are best practices. What is the minimal set of things you need to standardize? That's one problem. The second problem today, where the pessimism comes in, is that there's a lot of initiatives going on to get a basic set of hygiene going. Like, what does an MCP registry look like? Is there a standard default secure MCP server that everybody can adopt from a nonprofit organization that they know is verified and trustworthy? Right? Is there a process for, like, if you see some of the malicious MCP servers out there, it used to be a good open source project. And then after getting into enough people's devices, finally, the person that created that added a backdoor into one of the future upgrades. So how do you, again, go into the AI bomb and all of that? How do you get a VeriSign kind of a certificate on an attestation on an MCP server that you're downloading, or an agent that you're going to use from a third party, where you know that, okay, you can trust this because you've got the attestation? Right? That becomes a problem. And I know in Cisco, we are trying to do some of this as well, but the velocity is not nearly enough. And what I'm afraid of is that, unlike classical security, I don't think organizations are even aware of the full complexity of how exposed they are with these. I just hope none of your organizations are putting MCP servers out in public just yet, because you may not have done enough evals of it to make sure that it is safe for you to do so. So that's what I would say. Exercise a giant dollop of caution and make sure that you're running the right sets of verification hygiene before you put something in public.
Super important. Go ahead, Ali.
I think to answer the question of maybe the thing that we're not talking about, or the challenge that still exists, I was kind of struggling to answer the question because I think there's a lot of opportunity in the tech as we evolve and continue to invest there. But I also think that there's like the human side of things, right? There's the human capital that's still going to be involved in all of these systems, and they do require convincing to adopt. And we do have the detractors out there who do know their domain quite well, right? I mean, the developers in the audience are probably seeing, you know, all of a sudden your sales team, your HR team, your marketer is no longer obsolete or outside of those creation processes. They are becoming more democratized and able to create their own systems organically and using some of the technology that's out there. So I think that there's a bit of a change management perspective where we have to be encouraging all employees across departments to be adopting these systems and to have the courage to go and try them out. And so that I think requires a little bit more thoughtfulness from management, thinking about the tools you're going to give your employees access to, which trickles down, of course, to putting their own parameters in there. But it's that encouragement to make sure that someone who's maybe not a developer by trade actually feels like they have access and input on the way that these systems are being deployed.
Cool. Thank you. Eric?
And I guess what I would add to the standards part, from an identity standpoint anyways, is that I think there's been a nice evolution over the last 30 years or so, where standards start to become, you just get a snowball effect, right? So before there was SAML, there wasn't really a way to think about federation. Then SAML comes out and it gets improved on with OpenID Connect and OAuth, right? So you don't need to have a new standard. Sometimes it's about investing further in a particular standard. So we're big proponents of all things OAuth and OIDC. We think that's a really good platform to invest in, and it's just getting started, right? I think OAuth and OIDC in 5 years from now is going to be very different, a lot more capable than what it was 5 years ago. The other standard that we're seeing a lot of value is in open telemetry, right? Where you want to have a consistent way to share information across different domains. Well, let's start with a common way to log things, for instance. And while that may seem like an obvious thing to do, it's remarkable how few things actually have been standardized on your logging, for instance. So, you know, just two simple things, simple to say, hard to implement. I would say, you know, go into OAuth and OIDC and open telemetry. We're getting a lot of value out of that.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think that's all the questions I had. We may have time to take a couple of audience questions. So if anybody wants to raise their hands and ask this phenomenal panel some hard questions from my side, go for it.
The only remote, so you're going to have to share. Okay, my mic is gone, so you all have it.
All right.
That's okay.
We'll take over. We're not going to let Tushar speak.
You had the question? Okay.
Sorry, thank you so much for the thoughtful insights. I have a question. I wonder how will organizations look like in 5 years when the supervisor is not the manager anymore, but an AI agent? What's about the impact of culture, relationship, and the human side, which is not, well, we're not touched right now? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so the question was, what are organizations going to look like in the future? I can start. We get this question a lot. So here's what we find cannot be automated: judgment, taste, and relationships. So the humans will still understand what are the standard, like what are the guidelines for how to evaluate what good versus bad actually looks like, right? Humans have great judgment, especially in the context of cultural, things, right? And so what we're finding is that certain functions are collapsing. So for example, product design and engineering are sort of starting to collapse with a lot of engineering tools. But the thing that is still needed is the judgment to evaluate what comes out on the other side. Is it good or is it bad? If it has a lot of UI, you're going to need someone who's really strong in aesthetic judgment and UX judgment. If it's something that is like a developer thing on the other side, you're going to have you need somebody who has really good judgment about what developers need and how they're currently working, and is the thing that's produced by the AI agents good or bad, okay? We also see marketing and sales collapsing. And so again, and that is where the judgment about relationships really comes in, right? And customer service as well here, although that's not collapsing yet into those two other functions. But when you're interacting with a customer, those relationships, your context about what it means to have a good relationship with somebody really determines what's good versus bad. So the AI agent supervisor is actually the chief of staff to the human manager. So there will still be human managers because they are the people who ultimately will determine if it's good or if it's bad, if the work that the agents are producing is up to snuff or if it needs to be improved, and then they will be writing the new guidelines to the supervisor to make the agent work better and better and better. So we see functions collapsing into the key sort of pieces where human judgment or relationships or taste needs to come in and, basically evaluate what's going on and direct it.
I think how we incentivize and how we monitor is going to determine how organizations traverse this journey. In the short run, what I would say is the challenge is not AI versus human. It is a human with AI being able to do a much better job than a human by themselves. And from a reskilling, upskilling perspective, I think that's a direction organizations should take.
You kind of touched on this in what you just were describing, but I just wanted to kind of get a direct response to a New York Times piece that happened, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, where the person kind of became addicted to agentic AI and got really into it and became kind of psychotic, and what safeguards or if there is anything that really can be done, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast.
I think in the panel we've kind of touched on this, but that idea of having, it sounds odd, but this oversight is going to be really critical. And I think some of those guardrails that you are going to be putting in place might not be known, but the ones that you do know, whether it be through testing or just pure logic, that should be able to help you kick it out to either that supervisor agent or to that human who has the ability to intervene. Those, I think, are going to be the starting points to make sure. I think I know the New York Times article that you're referring to, that incidences are protecting consumers who are engaging with this, as well as when you think about enterprise use cases.
I guess that's a great point. I guess what I would add to the 5 years out, you think about the Turing test, and there's been a number of cases where people have said, oh, well, this system can pass the Turing test. so it's indistinguishable from a human. And that's been happening for, last 2 years, give or take. Well, what happens 5 years from now? And you start to see this kind of breakdown in you can't believe what you see. You can't believe what you hear. You can't believe what you read. And it's almost like it's a post-factual world. And I don't know what the answer is, but I just see it, especially with Sora 2, that really opened my eyes like, holy cow, what's next? And so I think, in terms of the, getting too close to an AI, I think that movie, Her, was really well done. And it kind of years ago brought that to your mind, like, could you really fall in love with AI? Well, if it's indistinguishable from a real human, who's to say? Why not? So I don't know. There's a lot of questions that I have, and I'm dying to see what the answers are because it's happening fast.
The new regulation is addressing this, by the way, in California.
Hi, so my question is, what are some challenges that a business may face with implementing a supervisor agent, and how do they mitigate those challenges?
What are the challenges we see? Well, the first challenge is writing good guidelines. So there are technical issues. If any of you guys have written evals, right, you need to make sure that they're stable, that they're consistent. So we have a whole testing experience for business users to be able to do that when they write guidelines. So that's, oftentimes the first kind of barrier where people don't really know, like, is this just my system directives? Like, is this just my guardrails again? Like, how do I get past this? So we feel like that's where we spend the most time with companies, trying to help them understand how to write the guidelines to train the supervisor agent. The next thing is, okay, so who owns the outcomes of this? And honestly, the best thing that we've seen, we have a case study on this with Sauce Labs, is initially it was the product team, right, that implemented the supervisor agent, and it was going to be responsible for watching it, and they were, going to do oversight on the customer service agent. And then they said, well, why don't we just give this to all the customer service reps? And that's when things got amazing, right? Because it was the people who actually owned the business, who owned the agent, interacting with the agent, giving it feedback, and constantly improving it, giving it more context, like putting in all the tribal knowledge that they had in their heads that wasn't written down anywhere, and feeding it into the supervisor. But getting people to really work with that, I think, as you mentioned, right, and adopt that paradigm is hard.
I think we have time for two more questions. So one and then.
I have actually two sub-questions regarding discovery, identity, trust. First one is, let's say we will have a registry of agents or MCP servers or whatnot, and what are the best ways right now and maybe in the future to get to verify that that agent or MCP server is who it is saying it is and does what it says it does. And regarding the identity portion is, have you been able to deal with background authentication? Because all of the demos we see are shiny hello world, but the enterprise might be background. And you can see OAuth everywhere, and OAuth, as far as I know, requires user, and so where is the real background authentication there? I run into roadblocks so far.
Well, I guess I could speak to the identity part of your last question on the way to, on the back end server side, how do you authenticate things? It comes back to digital certificates. And I think if you have control over the agents within your organization, I think Spiffy is the way to go. If you don't, because they're coming in off the internet, then you find other alternative ways like PKCE, which is not exactly authentication, but it's part of it. And then combine that with OAuth, dynamic client registration. So we find that public identity of the the identity of public agents, PKCE and OAuth DCR. Identity of a in-house agent should be done with SPIFFE and SVID.
I was wondering, Anand, you want to take the first part, which was more about how do you get...
Yeah, so some things that I can, I don't want it to be a product pitch, but there is a Cisco product called AI Defense that you can look at for more information.
That's
but
why I
there's also an open source project we put out there called MCP Scanner that you can download and you can run and test your MCP servers for vulnerabilities. We just published that, I think, 2 weeks ago. It might be hitting the press soon, so yeah.
Great. Anything you want to add?
Right, we got one more. I said you had your hand up first, I saw, so let me get to you. And while he's doing that, I had a question. You had a sticker on, Tatyana. What's your sticker say?
It says, stop agent slop.
Okay. Time for one more?
More agent builders means more people are going to be building agents, and you know what that means, slop.
Okay, so I think you guys hit the nail on the head that, agents are non-deterministic, and that's the biggest challenge in enterprises adopting it. So in terms of verticals and markets and use cases, where do you think this non-deterministic is not a challenge at all, in fact, even encouraged? And what are the verticals and use cases where this is an absolute no-no, even with guardrails or AI supervisor or other mechanisms to control it?
I mean, in the content and creativity world, hallucinations are a feature, not a bug. So when you're coming with new movie plots and you're coming with new book topics and all of that, new Netflix series, those are all great, right? Or if you're looking at things that are not intersecting with code of conduct, compliance, guardrails, guidelines, those are all places where agents can run wild. It's great. It's at that interface of what an organization needs to comply with, that's where it becomes more challenging.
And I think we're starting to see a little bit of adoption there with investment in standardizations, and leaning in on what we can do with the open source community, as well as making sure that these standardizations get deployed and adopted. That's where I think we're starting to see that trust from the enterprises actually grow because of the community support that surrounds it.
Long term, so look, somebody brought up, we are probabilistic systems. So the question is, are you going to have one type of probabilistic system write the rules for another type of probabilistic system? And if so, which probabilistic system should be writing the rules for the other probabilistic system? That's ultimately what we get to. There is no determinism, actually. It's humans determining what good looks like and trying to take our determinant, like our aesthetics, onto another system. Or if we're not actually as intelligent as an LLM, maybe the best probabilistic system that should be writing the rules for the other probabilistic system should go the other way around. Does that make sense?
And one other thing I'd add to that is, like, if you can't feasibly, like, unless you're on the team that's building the AIs themselves in the large language models and, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and so forth, you really aren't going to be able to influence how that AI works, in the same sense that you can control what that agent does, not by manipulating the agent, but by controlling the enforcement point when you think about an API that could spend all the money. Well, you can't necessarily change a probabilistic agent to say, hey, this is why you shouldn't spend money and try and make it better. What you can do today is put a gateway in front of the API that controls whether you spend money. So you can apply deterministic policy to certain things. Don't try and apply that to the wrong thing, because you're never going to get there.
Awesome. That's all the time we have for today. So I want to really, join you all in giving this panel a big round of applause.